Good evening, class. This is my portion of our group presentation on the ineffectiveness of U.S. sanctions of Iran. Um, just to sort of recap, Cindy has just gone over sort of the history between U.S. and Iranian relations before the 1979 revolution, and obviously after, which sort of changed things dramatically, as she indicated. Today, now in 2013, we find ourselves in a tense relationship with Iran, to say the least. In the most recent presidential election, uh, the last debate involved Romney and Obama. A lot of questions on Iran. It's a major political issue domestically. It's a major issue internationally. Um, it's an important issue. So we find ourselves in this situation now where the U.S. screams and the UN supports as much as they can these crippling sanctions in order to stop the Iranian nuclear program primarily. Uh, but there are other reasons the U.S. sanctions Iran, and we'll go into a little bit of that throughout this portion of the lecture. Um, Basically, you know, it's a tense situation, and uh, the history of Iran sort of speaks to that. I mean, Iran, this was Persia. I mean, this was the center of power for a whole a culture for many years, uh, and within the Middle East region anyway, and so Iran has a very important role in this region. It has a very important role to play internationally, uh, and with the current situation, the way sanctions go, I feel like, and we'll go into it a little bit, but I feel like the U.S. sort of treats Iran as a bad behaving child, and I think Iran responds as someone would that doesn't like being treated as an ill-behaving child. Um, so let's go right into it. The sanctions portion of the lecture, and really the meat of this portion as I go through it, sort of talk about what sanctions are, uh, sort of recap why the U.S. Well, not recap, but go into why specifically the U.S. Sanctions Iran, and then really get into why they're ineffective. Uh, and this is the major thesis statement of our portion of the presentation, of our presentation collectively. So I thank Cindy for the introduction, and I'll go ahead and get right into it. So basically, to start off, I thought it was important to sort of discuss what sanctions are. We hear a lot about sanctions. It's in the media, sanctions. I kind of knew what they were. I mean, I kind of know what the meaning of the word is, but I don't think a lot of people do. I know my learned colleagues all watching this PowerPoint. You guys probably all know what sanctions are. But just in case somebody stumbles upon the video that doesn't know what a sanction is, I thought it was important to go into it. So what is a sanction? What are sanctions? There's no real universal definition. They're basically an aggressive action aimed at prompting someone to do something. So in this case, it's a state. The U.S. uses its power to sort of force a certain type of behavior from Iran. Um, there's lots of different ways to sanction, but that's essentially it. Hey, I'm stronger than you, and I'm not going to punch you, but I'm going to use my strength in such a way as to sort of force you to act a certain way. Maybe I threaten to beat you up and thereby force you to walk a certain way to school. That would be a sanction. I don't want you walking down my street. That's my desired behavior. So if I see you on my street, I will beat you up. So you will walk on another street. So I've sanctioned your behavior. I've forced you to do what I want, and if you violate my sanction, if you come down my street, we're going to fight. Okay, so the first historical use of sanctions, um, going back in history, 432 BC, Athens had a very powerful navy, and they used this navy to to place a trade embargo on the city of Megara, and that action obviously would lead to, hey, we're going to starve you out, and then you guys can't get anything until you do whatever you want. And I did not research what exactly it was that Athens wanted Megara to do, but it's just the first example of sanctions. So sanctions are common policy tools that countries use to get other countries to do things. The Cold War was really a big sanctions game, wasn't it? I mean, you have two superpowers sort of attempting to sanction each other, because one of the requirements for sanctions is you have to be stronger than who it is you're trying to sanction. Because you can't effectively, Colombia couldn't really sanction the U.S. very effectively. They don't have a whole lot of influence on this. Sure, we import some stuff from them, probably, but even if they stopped, I mean, yeah, well, so the price goes up 50 cents on some sort of some product or another. No big deal. So in the Cold War, you had two big superpowers that were, at least nearly equally powerful, and they were going around sanctioning other little nations, like, hey, do this way, or we won't support you, and those commies are going to come get you, or the Soviets saying, hey, do this, or we won't support you, and those capitalist pigs are going to come in here and they're going to kill everybody because they're evil. So it's a sanctions game. It's trying to force people to it's governments trying to influence governments. I said it best in the slide. I just glanced over at it. So now that we know what sanctions are, why is the U.S. sanctioning Iran? Well, Sydney went over a lot of reasons. The 1979 hostage crisis. They support terrorism. Their nuclear program is an obvious one. Obviously, the biggest sort of issue today. They have regional ambitions. They want to influence Hezbollah. They want to move into Libya. Not necessarily overtly, like expand the nation's borders or anything, but they want Iran's presence to be felt in the Middle East. Iran wants to sort of have a little hand in everything, and that's not in our interest because we sanction them. And I'm going to go into a little bit why it ends up being confusing for Iran. I mean, if you just put yourself in the shoes of an Iranian leader, as you'll see as I go through this lecture, you might be confused as to what you're supposed to do. I mean, the U.S. comes up with sanctions, but it does other things, and is it really in your interest? But we'll go into it. So moving on, and just to point out on the support of terrorism, the Hezbollah, I mean, is a wing of the Iranian military. It's a direct support. It's one of their Iranian Guard army. I can't remember the proper name for their army. The Islamic Republic Guard, and Hezbollah is a wing of that, and they're a designated terrorist organization. And that's not because we have sanctions on Iran. That's because they're a terrorist organization. They engage in terrorist activity in Lebanon and other countries. So, now let's just quickly go over what are some of the examples. How specifically does the U.S. sanction Iran? This is another area for our friends that may be stumbling upon this video that aren't learned like us, didn't read Ansari's book, or haven't really studied this. And to be quite honest with you, before this course, I didn't really know what the U.S. sanctioned. I knew the U.S. sanctioned Iran. I didn't really know what it was that we really do. Okay, we sanctioned them. I don't really totally know what that means. So here's some examples. Started out hey, we don't want you to import, we don't want to import stuff from Iran. And we told Iran, we're not importing stuff from you, and we're not going to export stuff to you. We're not trading. Uh, then it sort of got a little more serious. This is all going back, after 1979. Then it got a little more serious. Okay, no goods or services, and then all trade activity, and then basically it's come down to now where preferably U.S. policy would be, hey, we don't want so much as any U.S. citizen so much as loaning $1 to an Iranian. Just it's that serious. Like that would be preferable. Obviously, that's extreme. That's impractical. It's not real. But that's the idea. We don't want so much as a dime going to the Iranians from the hand of a U.S. citizen. Certainly not a government official. And if you do give a dime over there, we're going to sanction you in some way. So a U.S. company that sells construction equipment to Iran, okay, well, hey, you get these government grants, and now you're not going to get them because you sold stuff to Iran, and we don't like that, and because we're sanctioning them. So that's sort of what the sanctions are. The U.S. also spreads out and goes after countries, so our allies, Germany, and then Germany sells technology to Iran. Hey, Germany, we don't like that, and we don't like Iran, and we don't want you selling stuff to them. So now, remember that deal we made where we were gonna sell you this stuff? Well, we're not gonna do it anymore. And tough. And you can have the deal back if you stop selling stuff to Iran. And it sort of goes like that. So we basically we punish everything involved with Iran. So moving on. And the stance that's before we move on to the next slide, and sorry I haven't been saying next slide, I will from here on out. Now that I've only got 3 left, great. So the stance of seemingly just sanctioning for the sake of sanctioning ends up hurting the U.S. In other words, it seems like U.S. politicians just like the word sanction. Yes, sanction, sanction, sanction. Yeah, well, crippling sanctions. That's what Obama likes to say. Romney likes to say, crippling sanctions, 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 sanctions. And it ends up hurting the U.S. interests. And we're going to, again, get into that as the lecture goes on. But right now, the meat of the lecture, the 3 main reasons why U.S. sanctions against Iran are ineffective. So the first reason is Iran has a lot of oil, and they sell it to other nations, lots of other nations. There's a graphic in the next slide, but don't move there yet. They sell oil. They have a lot of it. A lot of nations buy it, allies and enemies. Obviously, enemies of the U.S., people that don't really like the U.S. anyway. So what's a sanction? I'm going to buy Iranian oil. I've got a complete market here. You're already buying up all the Iraqi and the Saudi Arabia and all the Omani and all the other oil from the Middle East, or most of it anyway. So you don't buy it from Iran? Well, they got a lot too. I'll just buy it from them. So another reason is another reason that U.S. sanctions are ineffective is Iran receives foreign investment from other places. So, like I mentioned before, the Caterpillar company, that's a sanction against foreign investment. We don't want foreign companies investing in your country. Well, Iran or Russian and Chinese companies don't care. We'll come down there, Iran, and we'll give you some infrastructure build up. We'll invest. We'll get some construction equipment and build up some infrastructure, roads, and this sort of thing. I don't think they're actively supporting their nuclear program per se, although there may be some indications that Russia might be, but nothing concrete. I didn't find any research on that. And the third reason that I think everybody can kind of draw the conclusion of why the sanctions are ineffective is they've been around for 30 years. And Iran, as Cindy alluded to a couple times, I mean, the hardliners there are like, yeah, sanctions, schmanction, so what? I don't care. It doesn't hurt us. Oh, our tomatoes are expensive. Wham. I really don't care. And they're just ineffective. It doesn't do anything concrete, really hard that makes the country want to behave in a certain way. Yeah, sure, some things more expensive, but because of the first two reasons, they're still receiving just like every other country. So now let's move on, next slide, to the graphic of the other countries that Iran sells oil to. And as you can see, I mean, it's a lot. They're selling, this is billion barrels per day of people who import. So, I mean, as you see in Europe, you've got U.S. allies, Italy, Spain, France, Netherlands, a combined, 300, almost 300 billion barrels a day just to allies in Europe. Okay, Turkey, maybe not quite an ally. We know Iran's got support there, another 200. South Africa, okay, small time. India, not really necessarily an ally or an enemy, but certainly a big country, a lot of U.S. foreign investment there. They're buying up oil. We mentioned China, South Korea, an ally, Japan, an ally, So they're selling billions upon billions of barrels of oil a day to a lot of allies. Of course, China, again, there's that, we're going to go buy it anyway. You're not buying it. So it's just ridiculous to think that we could actually stop that. And now I'll get into the thing I kept alluding to in the next slide on the secondary reasons. You should be on the slide by now, entitled Secondary Reasons. So, as I said, the U.S. really doesn't have any clear policy goal. What are we trying to do with these sanctions? What specifically are we trying to do with these sanctions? Okay, stop your nuclear program. What does that mean? That means take away all the plans, stop enriching uranium. What does that really even mean? Okay, so let's say we figure that out. It's all gone. We got rid of the whole plant. We dug a big hole in the ground, blew it up with a conventional weapon. Okay, so now you're going to stop sanctioning us? I don't think so. We still support Hezbollah. So now we got to stop doing that. And there's never a clear message from the State Department, from the Obama administration, from the Bush administration, from Clinton or Bush Sr. or Reagan, anybody before that. It's not clear. What is it you want us to do? Okay, 1979, 1980, you want us to release hostages. Done. Still sanctions. Okay, and then you want us to do this. Then you want us to do this. Then you want us to do this. So what incentive do I have to stop sanctioning or to stop doing whatever it is you don't want me to do? Because sanctions never go away. You just keep sanctioning. It seems to me, if I'm in Iran, if I have myself in Ahmadinejad's shoes, you don't like me anyway. So since you don't like me, I don't like you. So what? So we'll just deal with that. We'll just live that way. Also something Cindy alluded to multiple times in her portion, which sets me up really nicely. So thanks, Cindy. Submitting to U.S. sanctions is not in the best interest of Iranian leaders. It makes them look weak. And a Gallup poll, actually, that I found in my research, recently taken, I'm sorry I didn't post the graphic, but you can look it up. The Iranian population, upwards of 67%, blame the U.S. for the sanctions anyway. So if the Iranian leaders then say, okay, U.S., we're done with the nuclear program, well, that makes them look like idiots to their own population. So why would they do that? That would be ridiculous. I mean, politicians are politicians. They're trying to stay in power. They're trying to do what's popular. So instead, they get to use the sanctions as a springboard and say, sanctions, we've had them for 30 years. Country's strong. We're doing great. Don't need any help. Get out of our face. Bring them on. Bring on more sanctions. I like them. And that builds up people like Ahmadinejad. He's not the only one. I mean, there's all sorts of people like him right behind him. Also, another secondary reason why the sanctions are ineffective is no one really wants war. Iran kind of knows that the U.S. isn't really going to go to war over sanctions. It's just not. It's not practical. The Strait of Hormuz is so critical to the region. And although Iranian's military isn't much, they could really make that waterway, which all the rest of the oil from all the other countries that do like the U.S. goes through, they could really make securing that a real headache for the U.S. So it's just not going to happen. And Iran kind of knows it. And even though the Iran can't hit the U.S. mainland, they can strike all sorts of U.S. interests in the region. So that's basically my portion. I now pass it off to Cindy, who's going to sort of go, so now that we know that sanctions don't work, What are we going to do about it? Thank you.